Well, today our theme is taking refuge. And I'd like to start by thinking about it on the physical level, because that is what is most familiar to us. And in a way, it's very much the story of our 21st century time. Our response to it, our moral and practical response to this question, is really going to be laying down the future for our human family. And we have a very long way to go on this. And I think that's partly because we also don't understand what taking refuge at an inner level really means. That we can't think about offering safety to those who are without it until we also know how to offer safety to ourselves, how to offer a depth of safety to ourselves at an inner level. So we talk about refugees as people who are without a country, without a home, and most of all, without the entitlement of belonging, without that sense of belonging that most of us here in Australia take for granted, but that we are very actively denying many other people. We are denying them a sense of belonging, perhaps even without thinking of the extent to which our own mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual well-being utterly depends upon it. So if we think about this with more subtlety and actually with more courage, I hope that we can receive this as an invitation to think again far more deeply about what it would mean to find a true place of refuge within ourselves so that we can meet the world, so that we can act in the world, so that we can move through the world with very much more grace and graciousness, with very much more generosity, with very much more enthusiasm, and not some tight little version of enthusiasm that's just about me and mine, but about sharing our enthusiasm for life with all those who share this gift of life. What a different world we would live in if generosity was above everything the characteristic that we valued most. What a different world we would live in. I began my thinking about today's service by thinking very much about what the Buddhists call the three jewels. And I suspect that Tan would have known something about the three jewels in his childhood in Vietnam. The three jewels are the refuge that a Buddhist would take first in the Buddha. So the phrase would be, I take refuge in the Buddha, the embodiment of enlightenment. In other words, the embodiment of understanding what this life is for and about, and what our possibilities are in it. The second phrase is, I take refuge in the Dharma, in the beauty of the teachings that have been given to us, in this lavishly abundant teachings that are available for us, should we be the slightest bit confused about how we ought to be living. And the third of the jewels is so lovely too. I take refuge in the Sangha, which basically means in the community. And in our reading of it, in this 21st century life, if we're following a universal path of love, what that would actually mean is that I take refuge in my knowledge that I belong to a vast and diverse and infinitely precious human family from which no one is excluded. I take refuge in that. It is the source of my confidence. It is the source of my self-worth. It is the moral lodestone from which I make my choices and decisions. To choose to take refuge in this way, to choose the spiritual reality of taking refuge is at least initially, a choice. But then it very quickly becomes a commitment. It's a commitment that this, above all, is what matters. It's very tempting, of course, in our society to take refuge in overwork, to take refuge in the excitement of new relationships, or to take excitement in gambling, or I don't know what, all sorts of things. People take refuge, fly to that in order to be distracted. But of course it doesn't fill their hearts with very much joy, and it does not necessarily generate the kind of generosity, the depth of generosity, the seriousness of generosity that our world needs. The equivalent of taking refuge for Christians might be the act of confirmation, or it might be a belief that they have been born again in Jesus Christ. And it's very easy to laugh at this idea, or to think it's a very fundamentalist idea, but actually it is absolutely exquisite if we take it seriously. There was such an early example of this in Paul's letter to the people of Galatia. It is not I any longer who lives, but Christ who lives in me. In other words, I am allowing the Christ energy to live in me, to direct me, to guide my intuitions, to inspire me, which of course doesn't in the least bit mean retreating into some kind of piety or separation from humanity. On the contrary, what it means is an increase of engagement, and an increase of inclusion, and an increase of passion and forgiveness. Understanding this is, in the Buddhist sense, as well as in the universal sense, to come awake to who you are, to what matters, and to how you will live. Because how you will live itself matters. It itself has reverberations, not only in your inner world, but in the outer world. How are we collectively creating a world in which more and more of us can feel safe? Where we feel safe even to tell our neighbours who we are, truly. Where we are going, truly. Where we are safe enough to know that we will be welcomed. I noticed there is a beautiful new welcome mat just outside our church, and I was so pleased to see it, because welcome is one of the most powerful words in any language. Welcome. Welcome. This can be a place of refuge, is what the word welcome denotes. So our choice, and I think for most of us, it is a choice that we need to make daily, that we are free to make daily, to take refuge in the place of our heart, where we can learn what it would mean to come into the world with greater wisdom and thoughtfulness. And this is where we again have that lovely movement between reflection and action, meditation and prayer, and spiritual and social activism. Some of you might remember that beautiful teaching from Francis of Assisi, where he says, God came to my house and asked for charity. I fell on my knees and cried, Beloved, what shall I give? Just love, he said. Just love. Well, what a refuge. What a refuge we would be giving to ourselves and to others if we could live by that, moment by moment, day by day. I can ask you to think about this. I am asking you to think about it. I can urge you to think about it. But the beautiful, subtle thing about taking refuge is that I can't do it for you. I can only share with you this invitation that has come to us from some of the most embodied teachers that have ever walked on this earth. Come to me, all you who struggle and are burdened, and I will give you rest. I can share that. Jesus shared that. The Buddha shared the ideas that I've been sharing with you in this small talk. But your discovery of it will only come about through personal experience, through you risking taking refuge in the place of the heart, in the place of the soul, in the place of the spirit, which is where the divine, the embodied, the enlightened speaks. This is such an important point. I hope that I'm saying it really, really clearly, that I can't take refuge for you, but I can invite you. And maybe I can invite you even more convincingly when I tell you that learning this, learning what it meant to take refuge, which perhaps I did for the first time with just a little glimmering 35 or maybe even 40 years ago, that I also have experienced that I need to take refuge every day. That the days in which I forget to take refuge are days which feel harder than they need to be, which feel less refreshed, and where I will meet the world in perhaps a less gentle, less powerful way than I would otherwise. So again, we come back to this exquisite dance between reflection and inner work and outer conduct. Neither one exists without the other. I've called them on other occasions the yin and the yang, and so they are. Receiving what prayer gives us, receiving what meditation gives us, and allowing it to transform us through our own experience of it. Some of this we will do in silence. Some of this we will do, and we will also learn what a refuge silence can be. And I found this beautiful quote on Brad's wonderful Facebook page, It's One Song. It comes from Paul Nitter, who's a theologian and also a religious pluralist. And he wrote a lovely book, by the way, called Without Buddha, I Could Not Be a Christian. I can recommend it to you. And he wrote, if the divine, however you interpret that, if the divine is truly a mystery that is beyond all human comprehension, beyond all human ideas and words, then any spiritual practice must make room, make lots of room for the practice of silence. Now, why would this be? Because it is a practice of reception. And so is the practice of taking refuge. It appears to be very active, and so it is in its first phase. We make an active choice to take refuge in the quiet depth of our own hearts and souls. We make an active choice to take refuge in these divinely inspired teachings that have come to us from all directions over recorded time. But then we also receive what its meaning is for us on this particular day. Today is 16th of March, 2014. Tomorrow it will be another day. And what is the meaning for us on that day? And taking refuge, we discover not only perhaps something about the meaning of those moments of silence, but we also discover how we will embody this meaning, how we will be replenished, how we will be refreshed, how we will take courage from it. And if we do this on a gentle, rhythmic, daily basis, then when those devastating days come, and they do come sometimes, when those devastating days come where we scarcely know which way to turn, something in us will remember and return us to that place of refuge which is within ourselves, which was there in our coming in, and which, God willing, will be there on our departing. I want to emphasize to you that taking refuge is not an escape. It is not a withdrawal in any way from the world. It is what allows for a more courageous engagement. I think it's reasonably safe to assume that the kind of hysterical, dehumanizing denigration of people seeking asylum in our country arises from a place of fear. We need to meet that fear, not with our rage, or not only with our rage, but also with our courage. With our courage to say that we can afford to think differently, but we can also afford to think differently about ourselves and the hospitality and the richness that we have within ourselves. We don't need to be an excluder either of ourselves. We can bring all parts of ourselves. We can bring our shames, our sorrows, our idiocies, our everyday mistakes, our forgetfulness, our irritations. We can also bring those to our place of refuge. And we can be transformed, and we can transform them. Finally, for me, and I think for many of you also, the imagination, as well as inspiration that arises from imagination, has been a profound place of refuge. It is a gift that is given to our human family, and is a gift that we can use for ill, and it is a gift that we can use for good. The gifts of imagination are beyond describing. And again, I don't need to describe them to you, because you experience them. You experience them within your own mind. You experience them as you rejoice in works of art. You experience them as you have conversations with people who live in a full and appreciative kind of way, and also in a compassionate and solace-spreading kind of way. For me, in my particular work, in my writing, in my ministry, but also in my living, in my personal life, inspiration and imagination have been huge resources. And again, I would ask you to give yourself the gift on a daily basis of allowing the gifts of imagination and inspiration to be woven in to your daily experience. Some of you know that I wrote a book on a visionary poet called Rainer Maria Rilke, and he wrote this poem to another poet, Marina Tetsuveya, and he didn't know that it was the last year of his life, and he wrote it sitting on a wall, just noticing the warmth of the wall and the little creatures, the little ants and lizards and so on, just on the ground in front of him. And it was never meant to be a poem to be published or particularly praised. But for me, it really speaks of this place of refuge, and I just wanted to share a tiny little part of it with you, where he says, "Oh, the losses into the all, Marina, the stars that are falling. We can't make it larger wherever we fling ourselves, to whatever star we go. In the whole, in this whole, all things are already numbered. So when anyone falls, the perfect sum is not lessened. Whoever lets go in his fall dives into the source and is healed. Waves, Marina, we are ocean. Depths, Marina, we are sky. Earth, Marina, we are earth, 1,000 times April. 1,000 times springtime. Praising, my dearest, let us be lavish with praise. Nothing really belongs to us. And when I wrote that out ready for you today, I thought, but we belong to it. Nothing belongs to us, but we belong to it. We belong to the all of the all. We belong to life in its infinitely complex radiance. We belong to the trusting in our places of constant and eternal refuge. We belong to the everyday miracle that is. Every day, life can be revealed as a miracle if we open our eyes to that. If we open our hearts to that. If we open our hearts, we become refuges as well as seekers. As we open our hearts to that, we dive effortlessly into the source, and effortlessly we are healed. Blessed be.